Okay, good evening. And today it's chapters 5 and 6. Now, chapter 5 is relatively short, and chapter 6 is relatively long. So we'll be a little bit like, if some farmer loads his truck all on one side and it goes down the road like this. But should work. Oh, and one thing I would like you to help me with, I have a strength that sometimes becomes a weakness. I can focus very intensely, and you saw it last night. I was so focused in my teaching, I forgot to put forward my PowerPoint. So if you notice that I'm keeping moving on and that thing isn't changing, holler, do something to get my attention that I get that back in sync. So, Abraham. We are quite familiar with him, and we'll start off with him today. I would think that probably most, if not all of you, remember the time where Abraham went down to Egypt because of bad economy where he was, and there was a less than comfortable situation. So if we look in Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 to 20, it's 11 verses there. I'll quickly read through them just to refresh what actually happened. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came about when he came near to Egypt that he said to Sarai, his wife, "See now, I know that you are a beautiful woman, and it will come about when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say that you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may live on account of you." And it came about when Abram came into Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And Pharaoh's officials saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Therefore he treated Abram well for her sake, and gave him sheep and oxen and donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. But the Lord struck Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Then Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She's my sister,' so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go." And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they escorted him away with his wife and all that belonged to him. So, not the prettiest story, is it? And so they did this little trick on Pharaoh, but God aroused Pharaoh to what the real situation was. And basically Abraham, or he was Abram at that time, was disgraced. He was told to get out of the country. As a matter of fact, he was escorted out of the country. Now let's go to chapter 20. Listen to this story. Now Abraham, he already was Abraham here, journeyed from there toward the land of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. Then he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said to Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." So Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream of the night and said to him, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is married." Now Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, "Lord, wilt thou slay a nation even though blameless? Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister,' and she herself said, 'He is my brother'? In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands I have done this." Then God said to him in the dream, Yes, I know that in the integrity of your heart you have done this, and I also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore I did not let you touch her. Now therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. So Abimelech arose early in the morning and called all his servants and told all these things in their hearing. And the men were greatly frightened. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done. And Abimelech said to Abraham, What have you encountered that you have done this thing? And Abraham said, Because I thought, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she actually is my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came about when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, This is the kindness which you will show to me everywhere we go. Say of me, he is my brother. Who knew that Abraham did that twice? Okay, some of you. You would think you would have learned the first time, right? But now here again, God protected, and things proceeded. Same king, different man, Isaac. Who was Isaac? Son of Abraham, right? So this time, Abimelech is more cautious already. This is in chapter 26. I won't read it because the story is very similar. There are a few little details different. But Abimelech was careful. He didn't bring Rebekah into his house. But he kept an eye on Isaac. And then he confronts Isaac. How come you said that she is your sister? I see you guys playing together. So they were flirting with each other and stuff like that. And he noticed that. The point here is that children learn from their parents and repeat what their parents do. So Isaac had grown up with Abraham and Sarah as his parents, and that's how his father had behaved, and he does the same thing. Now, in Isaac's case, actually Rebekah was not his half-sister like with Abraham and Sarah, but rather his cousin's daughter. And you may recall that Abraham sent Eliezer, his servant, to go find a wife for Isaac. And that's how that came around. Okay, so we see in the Bible an example of morality being passed on. And that's something that we need to be aware of as well. There's another thing that happens in families, and that has to do with favoritism. Now this, we'll start in chapter 25 of Genesis, verse 28. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had the taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Can you hear trouble coming? Yeah, that is trouble. So Esau and Jacob were twins, and Isaac grew attached to Esau, Rebekah to Jacob. Then if we flip over to chapter 27, verses 1 to 4. Now it came about when Isaac was old, and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son?" And he said to him, "Here I am." And Isaac said, "Behold now, I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die." Isaac was a field-type person. It seems that Isaac and Esau had similar interests. And so he loved the smell of the field. It says in chapter 27, verse 27, that's over on the next page. So he came close and kissed him, and when he smelled the smell of his garments, he blessed him and said. Now, this 27 here, that's actually where Jacob tricks, but it gives us a clue into Isaac's preferences and Isaac's desires. So, do you remember where Isaac was when he and Rebekah first met? He was out in the field, yeah. And so when Rebekah asked Eliezer, "Who is that man walking over there?" then he said, "That's Isaac." And then she veiled herself, right? So, yeah, here we see that particular connection. But there's another connection, and this we find, we have to page back to chapter 25, verse 28. And there we read, now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. That establishes that. And then in verse 27, verses 8 to 10, there Rebekah gives Jacob some instructions. "Now therefore, my son, listen to me as I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice kids from there, that I may prepare them as a savory dish for your father, just as he loves. Then you shall bring it to your father, that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death." So Rebekah knew her husband quite well. And she's going to trick him into blessing Jacob instead of Esau. And then if we read on from there, verses 11 to 12, Jacob smells trouble. He says, "And Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, 'Behold, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, then I shall be a deceiver in his sight, and I shall bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing.'" What does Rebekah say? Continue in verse 13. "But his mother said to him, 'Your curse is on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go and get them for me.' So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her elder son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. She also gave the savory food and the bread which she had made to her son Jacob." What's Rebekah teaching her son here? What do we call that? Deceiving. Exactly. Yeah, she's teaching her son to be crooked, to cheat, to deceive. And if we would read verses 26 to 29, and I'm sure you all know the answer to this, they succeed, don't they? Isaac actually blesses Jacob. And the results are the first seeds of hatred are planted. If we go to verse 41 of chapter 27. So Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." That's what favoritism, deception, those kinds of things bring. If we look at verses 42 to 45, that's where Jacob then gets sent away. Did you know that Jacob never saw his parents again? By the time he came back, his parents were both dead. Those are some of the results of having favorites, causing deceit, causing hatred, and those kinds of things. As a matter of fact, it's 20 years later when Jacob comes back, a rich man by then, with 2 wives and so on and so forth, a whole bunch of children. And he is still afraid of Esau. If we go several chapters forward to chapter 31 and verses 38 and 41. "These 20 years I have been with you, your ewes and your female goats." So this is the verse that proves that it's 20 years. Then verse 41, "These 20 years I have been in your house, I have served you 14. Okay, he's still talking to his father-in-law here. And then let's move on to chapter 22, verses 32, verses 7 and 11. "Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 companies. He had heard that Esau was coming toward him, and so he divided everything. One bunch was with Leah, and one bunch was with Rachel. And so if Esau was with his men, he had a whole bunch of men with him. If he was going to attack, then the one group had a chance to get away while he was busy attacking the other group. So we see what kind of trouble favoritism can create. If mom and dad have a favorite, it affects the whole family. Joseph was the favorite of Jacob. These guys aren't learning, are they? Abraham made mistakes that Isaac copied. Isaac and Rebekah made mistakes that Jacob is copying. He favors Joseph. We all know about the coat of many colors, and or some think that it should be translated coat of wide sleeves, but it doesn't matter really about the coat. What matters is the relationship that we see between Joseph and his brothers. So the culture continues in that family. So let's take just a few little minutes to reflect. I won't ask for anybody to say anything, but I'm going to give you maybe a minute and a half to just think about this question here. Are there character traits, maybe attitudes or behaviors or weaknesses, that can be traced in my family from generation to generation? Are there things that maybe my grandfather did that my father is doing, that maybe I am copying? I'm talking now about negative character traits, negative attitudes, negative behaviors, weaknesses. I'll just give you a little bit of time. Here's another question. Are there positive attitudes, behaviors, or strengths that you can recognize in yourself? What are attitudes that you have, or ways of behaving, or particular strengths that you have? Are there strengths that are largely genetic, which you can't pass on, you can't teach them to your children, you can't expect from your children? For example, maybe you are very athletic, and it could be that some of your children are not so athletic. Or maybe you are very quick in your thinking, and you see very quickly what is needed. But that's not everybody's gift. Maybe you have a child that does not operate that way. Let's just jump down to point B, right at the bottom of the thing. What changes will we make to avoid passing down negative things that we have to struggle with, that we have to deal with? Are there changes that I need to make in my life so as not to pass them on to my children? Maybe attitudes to a different ethnic group. I know I have to be a bit careful with myself on that particular one. Things like that. Because children pick up on the attitudes that we have. And they absorb them. Hey, it comes from mom, it comes from dad. Okay, where does all this lead us? Your child will have vulnerabilities. He may be gifted in athletics, in music, may have a really good memory, or maybe very quick-witted, very intelligent. Now, giftedness, you can't change. That's something that God has given him. And most likely, your child will have some areas of giftedness that are different than your own. Are you proud of his giftedness or disappointed? I had a brother-in-law who had an engineer's mind. And he had a hard time with people who had an artistic mind. Because an engineer's mind is very structured, very analytical. And an artist's mind is not like that, not at all. It has this creative bent. It wants to try new things, even if they don't work, but let's try it out, and so on and so forth. So those are things that we may have to adapt to. As far as sin is concerned, our children's minds are like sponges. They just soak that up. So my child hears me say something, and I make sure that it's accurate, that it's right, and so on and so forth. But then he watches that I don't behave like that. And he makes conclusions. So our child's, general characteristics, we have to ask ourselves, is this thing that annoys me about my child, is that something genetic, something that is permanent, that can really not be changed? Or is it something that he has learned from me, that he has absorbed as he watched me, as he listened to me? So, transformation is needed. Transformation is needed in the parent, and as we make changes as parents in our lives, we may be able to also promote transformation in our child's life. There's no guarantee that that will be successful, but as long as, let's take something that I suspect isn't really a big problem here. The father who smokes and tells his son not to smoke, how much sense does that make? But if that father then quits smoking, then he may have an opportunity to talk to the son about it. Okay, any questions, any thoughts that you have, or things that I have said that have left gaps? Then we'll have coffee at the proper time, but we'll go into chapter 6 now. So close your eyes for a second so that I can skip over this coffee slide, and then oh, wait a minute. Yeah, there is something else we have to talk about first. I thought I was a little bit further than I am here. Personality. That's another thing. That's a two-edged sword. Parent-child may be similar, which may attract them to each other. Now, if you as a parent are somebody who is very cooperative, flexible, gentle, and so on, and your child is similar, you'll probably get along quite well. Now, if I as a parent am assertive, a little bit bossy, proud, arrogant, self-centered, and my child shares these personality traits with me, there it won't go so smoothly, because the child will want to run his own life. That's part of his personality, part of how he wants to live. And I, as a parent, want to run his life. And so that's where troubles begin. With favoritism, the favored child can become arrogant. We saw that a little bit in Joseph, when he had these dreams, and he told them that you guys were stars, you're all going to bow down to me, and the sun and the moon, which represented his mom and his dad, they're going to bow down to me. So that can happen when a child knows that he's mama's favorite. And if he asks her for something, he'll get it. Or A child who knows that he or she is a favorite to either mama or dad can become manipulative. And so he'll go to the parent and get permission for things that his siblings would not get permission for. He knows how to butter the parent up so that he can have his way. And ultimately will probably become an adult of poor character. The siblings of the favored child, well, they will suffer from probably a poor self-image because the other child gets away with things that they don't get away with. They can never do things right. He never gets corrected, and so on. So they lose motivation to do their best or to please their parents or even respect their parents. As a matter of fact, at some point, they will start to rebel because they will see or perceive that as unfair. Well, not only perceive, it is unfair. And it can lead even to things like self-harm. If a person starts to feel that he doesn't matter, then that's what they do in order to convince themselves that they are really there. If you find that hard to understand, I'll admit I also find that hard to understand because I've never been in that situation. But one reads of that again and again and again, that people who are addicts, often that starts with wounds and hurts and a bad image of themselves where they start to do things just to remind them that they are real, that they do exist. And, well, not really that they do matter, but they do matter. Or to get parents to notice them. Some people who commit suicide hope that it won't work, hope that they will fail. But their real hope is that people who they wished they would matter to will notice and finally respond to them and give them this love, this attention that they need. Or a sibling will resent that sibling, which we saw in Esau and Jacob there, or even resent parents. There, now, close your eyes. We'll go a little bit into chapter 6. Oh, first maybe I should ask, anything about favoritism or about inheriting characteristics, dealing with such things? Anybody have a question or even a comment to make, maybe? Do you have a question? No? You're telling? Oh. Because he's the only one. He must be as smart as his dad, huh? Yeah. Yeah, that's Spos, but.
One question I have is maybe not so much with favoritism, but how can a parent be consistent in treating the children? For example, stuff that I never got away with when I grew up. I see my youngest brothers, it's no big deal to my parents.
You know, that's going to happen to you too. That just happens. That happened in my family. It happens in good families. Part of it is that a younger sibling has the advantage that the older siblings teach the parents some things. Another part of that, what fits to that, is that we are not perfect parents. And we are not experienced parents. So it takes us learning from trying to teach children and making mistakes and those kinds of things and making adjustments. And so the oldest child will quite often in a family get punished harder, maybe. More is expected of them, that kind of stuff. And as parents go along, they realize, hey, I'm being a bit too tough here. So one backs off a bit, and the next child benefits from that. So yeah, that's a good observation. But it's one which the only thing we as parents can do is try to learn as quickly as possible that the difference doesn't get too much. But then other things happen yet too. Let's say a couple starts off and have several children, and suppose they were non-Christians, they weren't believers, and all of a sudden they become believers, and things can change hugely there and can change or will change in how they parent as well. So, yeah, you saw that in your siblings, but forgive your parents. Any other questions? Okay, quickly before we get to coffee time here. We've talked about love yesterday. The children need love, and it's our responsibility as parents to give it to them. Now we are going to tie love and discipline together. This chapter is about discipline. So the purpose of discipline, and with discipline, I'm not saying spanking. I'm saying discipline. I'm saying teaching. That word train that we were working on in chapter 2, the first night, discipline belongs to that. And our purpose in disciplining our children and teaching them and training them is to teach them to discipline themselves, to give them the ability to decide what is the right thing to do, and then to stick with that, to go with that. We have in Proverbs chapter 22, we're going to spend a few minutes in Proverbs here. Those chapters are close together. Chapter 22 is the first one. And verse 15 says this. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. What's meant by foolishness is part of the heart of a child? A baby. Born with a sinful nature, yeah. And they look very innocent the first 6 weeks. But it's already there. And foolishness can often also be seen in sort of an I don't care attitude. Chuck Swindoll talks about foolishness as defiance. And really, isn't that what an I don't care attitude is too? If mom says, go sweep the floor, and I don't care about that, and walks off. That really is maybe a mild form of defiance, but is a defiance. So then we have Proverbs chapter 20, verse 11. These are just such little tidbits that Proverbs throws out here and there. Verse 11 says, "It is by his deeds that a lad distinguishes himself, if his conduct is pure and right." So we see what's in a child's heart by how he behaves. Maybe just a little example here. A few weeks ago, Gabi and I were in Rosenort, Manitoba, watching our grandson play hockey. They were playing against Altona, and he's a little 7-year-old. These were 9 and under. He's a little 7-year-old. Just learned to skate this year. And they were playing their heart out. Of course, Altona was much stronger. They were losing badly. And there is a boy on his team who's probably the second best skater on his team, and also, I would say, the second best goal scorer. His name is Henry. And Henry gets discouraged easily. When they fall behind in goals and that kind of stuff, if he trips, he will stay lying there and things like that. So here, the Steinbeck team had been around the Altona goal and didn't score. As a matter of fact, Henry had the puck on his stick, and the puck gets taken away from him. And in that whole process, he falls on the ice, and he just stays lying there. And of course, Altona is heading for Steinbeck's goal to go score. And the Steinbeck parents are all saying, get back, to stop them. And here's our little Saxon. He's sort of somewhat behind the whole pack, and he's standing there and looking back and forth like this, and his parents are saying, go back, Saxon, go back, help. And Saxon didn't hear anything. You know what he did? He turned around and went and skated to Henry, made sure he was okay. And after the game was over, he got Best Player Award. He got rewarded for looking after his teammate. So the goal wasn't his. So there we could see there is a compassionate side in him. Now he's a teaser too, and he will give his grandma a hard time sometimes, but yeah, we need to be observant. What motivates our child? What determines how he behaves and how he thinks? Proverbs 23, verse 13. Do not hold back discipline from the child. Although you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from death, or from Sheol. I know, that translation seems a bit unfortunate, doesn't it? So, the beating can also be translated strike, but it's not meant as what we understand beat to mean in English, but rather to hit, to strike. And it rescues him from worse harm. That is really the intent. We have to go back to our definition of love. Any action to the benefit of the other. We want to benefit our child. Now, if we beat him the way we understand beating, then it won't turn out to be a benefit. In the first place, he'll start to resent us and resent what we claim to stand for and those kinds of things. But to give him enough pain to realize that that is not the way to go, and to do that in love, that will help him. That will train him. Proverbs 29, verse 15. The rod and proof give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother. And that we see that again and again, that children who aren't trained do things. As a matter of fact, I have a cousin who is 3 months younger than I am, and I, as a kid, overheard adults saying that when my cousin was being mischievous in public, my uncle didn't know him. Det visste ikke hvem som kjente at vi er. Instead of, tapping him on the shoulder and saying, "Come with me, we have to have a little talk." I wonder whose kid that is. So, these verses, essentially what they're supposed to do is bring out the point that it's important that we train our children, that we discipline them. And where there is discipline, there is hope. This comes out of Proverbs 19, verse 18. And I think this may be our last Proverbs verse, 19, verse 18. Discipline your son while there is hope, and do not desire his death. That is putting it sort of strongly, but and we mentioned that a little bit yesterday already. We'll touch on it once more today, but to teach basic foundational things when they are young. And if we can put those things in place, let's say by the time they start school, it will make a lot of other training and teaching easier. When a certain attitude or behavior first appears, that's the point to deal with it. And we'll talk about how to deal with it. Before it becomes a pattern, before it becomes a habit, and certainly before it becomes a fatal flaw where it leads them into all kinds of other troubles. If, for example, a father never teaches his son not to be arrogant, ultimately he will carry that with him, and once he is 18, 19, 20, into his 20s, sometime he's going to tangle with somebody who's going to be bigger and will teach him a lesson at that age. Now, if the father had taught it to him when he was young, that he would have been saved that trouble. Our son learned a little lesson when he was young, probably about 7 maybe, or I don't know exactly, I think around there. And he was, this was at school, it was outside, recess time. And when he came home at lunchtime, he had a pretty good bruise or scrape or something on his forehead here, and maybe even his nose, I don't remember exactly. And so Gabi asked him what had happened. Well, one of the big guys had pushed his head into the wall, and the school building is made of brick. I mean, that left some marks. And so Gabi had asked him, well, what did you do? Well, I called him Fatso. So he had to learn a little lesson there. But if we can teach our child young to have proper attitudes, proper behavior, it will save him pain and trouble down the road. Have you noticed that all the biblical examples that I've brought forward over these last few days of parenting in the Bible have all been negative? parents described in the Bible were far from great parents. Here we have a situation where there are good parents. Now, this is the story of Jesus. Oh, you know, it's time for coffee. This is a good place to stop and then continue later on. 15 minutes. Get going. The people that want to be late, we have to give them a chance. So we'll get started here. So Jesus as a boy, you're familiar with the story where when he was 12 years old, his parents took him to Jerusalem. And when they started on their way home, it turned out he wasn't with them. And so now maybe I need to talk a little bit about the fact that he was a boy. It's the Greek word pais means boy or youth. Now, I think nowadays, you and I, if we had a 12-year-old son and we were heading for home, we would find him and make sure that he was coming with us. But a 12-year-old son in those days was almost considered, I don't want to say adult, but he was considered responsible. And so at age 13, a Jewish boy became a voting member in the community. So that's how different the expectations were then than they are now. The term that they used was, he was a son of the commandment. And this is tied to, I suspect quite a few of you have heard of the term bar mitzvah. That's a Jewish ceremony where exactly this happens, that the child has reached a certain stage in society and in his development. They have to learn certain amounts of scripture and things like that. And it's sort of a graduation, a social graduation. So at 12, Jesus was right at the threshold of becoming the age of majority. And so he stayed back. And then we see Joseph and Mary coming back, looking for him. And we can tell in the passage that they are concerned, especially Mary. And she doesn't quite chide Jesus, but, you know, what have you done? We have been looking for you. And then Jesus gives his explanation. Notice that Jesus stays calm, Mary stays calm, Joseph we don't hear of it at all. And in the end, it says that Mary dwelt on what Jesus had told her, because he had told her that he had to be about his Father's business. And so this must have been going around in her head. So we are talking here about administering discipline early. It finishes off this passage that Jesus continued in subjection to them. So Jesus hadn't turned rebellious or anything like that. As a matter of fact, he continued to respect them, to obey them, and so on. There's no hint of resistance in him or rebellion. It points to a good parent-child relationship. And now we're going to start talking about some of the very practical things that are involved in good parenting. And I'm starting off with parents be united. come to an agreement on basic principles that you are going to use to train your children, to teach them, to discipline them. Decide together. Husbands and wives have grown up in different houses and different families and have grown up under different systems of disciplining. And we have to, as husband and wife, come to an agreement. There are other things that play into that yet too, right? The personality between a husband and a wife are usually different, quite frequently opposite. So that can create issues. We won't spend too much time on that right now, but rather I want to emphasize we have to agree how, when, where, why we are going to discipline. Now, it's impossible, as we talk about these things, to foresee everything that can happen. So that means we have to work on principles. What are some basic principles that we will use to raise our children? And if we can do that and stick to them, see, that can be another thing. One parent has a kind of personality that every time exactly the same, very consistent, but his spouse may have a much more relaxed personality. And so this whole idea of consistency, connection between husband and wife and so on. So that's why it's important that we do this very consciously. In Low German we would say met fleet. So that we are united. And also, once we have that in place, we have to help each other. There have been times where something happened, and I was going to discipline, and then Gabi would call me aside a bit and say, are you sure you're doing the right thing? Sometimes I may have my own issues just then, and that may have set something off in me that would have caused me to discipline far too harshly or not take time to think at least a little bit, where is this coming from, why is this happening, and so on and so forth. So as spouses, we have to agree that we will help each other. Now, that we may not always agree even then. And so when that happens, maybe we even have to go privately and talk it through a little bit. And if we can't come to an agreement, then the question is, which of the parents saw what happened? And the parent that saw what happened probably is in the better position to decide how to apply discipline than the one who did not see it. Okay, this may all be a little bit of a ticklish thing. Any questions that are coming out of this? But try not to disagree about how to discipline in front of the child. Now, I'm not saying that our children should never see us disagreeing. They have to watch how we as parents clear up disagreements between each other. But that should be about other things than how to discipline them. Because then it becomes possible for them to manipulate and to interfere and those kinds of things. Now, Starting discipline early, how early? Well, in some ways already in infancy. This starts with things like not immediately running when a baby cries a little bit. Dobson already had that in his first book. We have tried to use that with our infants. One has to really assess the situation. Are there needs that that baby has? Why is he whimpering? And if there is no need, he's dry, he's fed, and so on and so forth, he's not sick, then it's best not to always run right away when there is a little bit of a whimper. Because that teaches him, if I whimper, then mom will come, or if I whimper, then dad will come. So when waking up, maybe if one hears them making noises, try just waiting a little bit. And if there's a pause, then go in. With that, we're trying to teach them that we will come even when they're quiet. And this business of calling us by crying doesn't get embedded in them. Now, of course, one doesn't always judge it right, so we have to be careful there. There could be a reason, and we need to check it out. As a matter of fact, I remember one of our friends telling me one time that their child had been crying, and he really hadn't wanted to respond, but finally he had, and he had found that the safety pin had opened on the diaper and was poking the child. So that child would not have gone to sleep. And so we don't overdo this, but it's just a bit of a guide not to hop immediately just because a child whimpers a bit. It has happened that a child will cry a little bit, and then it'll get quiet again and sleep for a whole hour or whatever. So that I would say would be how one starts very early already to train a child. And when one is training a child, let's be creative. Here I'm talking about connecting the corrective action with the problem action. If the problem, let's use as an example, a child, it's a bedtime problem. And he's 8 years old, he has school the next day, he's supposed to be in bed by 8 o'clock. And 8:15, still not in bed, still running around. 8:20, finally gets into bed. One thing that I tried to do was, okay, you're 20 minutes late today, you'll be 20 minutes early tomorrow. So at 7:40 will be bedtime tomorrow. And if he's late again tomorrow, then add that on. Now, one doesn't get ridiculous about this, but you want to teach him that, hey, if I don't start towing the line here, this is going to get worse and worse for me. So I better start shaping up here. Try to connect the corrective action with the problem action. Some people, I don't know whether we have used that very much, but some of our friends did. They would tell their child maybe 10 minutes before bedtime, okay, I'm going to go set the timer, and in 10 minutes, it means go and brush your teeth and get ready for bed. That's another way. That way we're not, they're busy playing there and their imagination is going and so on and so forth, and we're not just yanking them out of that. We're giving them a chance to sort of get ready to stop this whole thing. So, take a child's likes and dislikes into consideration. This can be used positively and negatively. Negatively, if there is some training that needs to happen and the child hasn't been obeying or hasn't done something that you asked them to do, we can take away a privilege. Now, if we take away a privilege, it has to be something that he actually likes, that he values. Otherwise, it won't be effective. Or we can give him a chore that the kids don't really like to do. Those are negative ways of disciplining. But positively, we can promise a reward, something he likes. And here maybe one has to be a little bit careful that it doesn't turn into mere bribery. If we are not careful, the child may start to manipulate us. I heard something funny from our youngest grandson. It's months ago already, but his mom wanted him to do something, and he wanted to start dealing with her. Well, if I'm going to do that, then I want to be able to do such and such. It may happen occasion, but you don't want to start parenting like that, because you'll be making deals forever, and you're probably going to start losing here and there. So, no, we have to remain parents, and the child has to remain a child. An example. You send your son, who's a loner, to his room because he did something wrong. Is that a punishment for him? He loves to be by himself. So that's not a punishment. Now, his sister, who loves to be with people, you send her to her room. That's punishment. So there are all these factors. Understanding who her child is, being smart about observing what they like and what they don't like, and using such things to train them. It's not that we want to hurt them or upset them or anything like that. We want to train them. That is our goal. And so that also helps us to determine how harsh we are. Do we send a 6-year-old to his room for an hour? Maybe 15 minutes will do it, or maybe 10 minutes will do it, at least the first time around. If it continues to be a problem, then we can jack things up a bit, make them longer. Charts. Oh, Gabi and I have charts. I have used charts. That wasn't the days when the computers were running on DOS. I still have those someplace, but computers nowadays wouldn't be able to read that stuff. But we had charts for chores and different things like that. This one is responsible for setting the table, and this one's responsible for clearing the table, and this one's responsible for washing dishes, this one's responsible for drying dishes, sweeping the floor, on and on. And charts are actually quite handy. They make things very clear. It's very clear who's responsible for what. They show when a job has been completed, because let me tell you, they're pretty quick at going and marking on the chart that they've done it. And it also lets you see right away when jobs aren't being done and who didn't do them. So they can be a great help. Charts help to motivate, because at the end of, let's say, a certain number of doing their chores, there can be some sort of reward. It doesn't have to be a monetary reward. It can be that you're going to spend half an hour of time with them playing, doing an activity that they like to do, that kind of thing. So it can help to motivate them. Oh, another thing is, young children, the reward needs to be fairly soon, not something, at the end of the month or something like that. As they grow older, of course, that length of time can be expanded, and eventually you don't need the charts anymore. They grow out of them. But take the age of the child into consideration. Any questions about what we've been talking about?
Charts can also be a bad thing when you are bad at actually implementing what the chart is about. I think I was just thinking of we've tried charts, and Melissa and I are both, well, Melissa's probably, she's more organized than I am. She's quite organized. I am not organized, and so charts are great intention, but I do feel that they've actually, in our house, they've done the opposite because we haven't followed through with it, and it's made our kids less disciplined, and it's made me feel like I'm not disciplined at all either. And so it's just been a discouraging thing, and I don't want to. I think the chart idea is great.
What, Blaine? It makes you feel that you're not disciplined? You just admitted that you're not disciplined.
I get it. Charts have proved that I am not disciplined.
Yeah, and you bring out an extremely important point, and that is, in parenting, we have to follow through, we have to be consistent. Absolutely. And in that sense, you're right. I guess Gabi and I are lucky that we're both the kind of people that once we, like a dog, once we get that rope in our teeth, we're not letting go.
Or maybe I need a computer that runs DOS.
Good luck. Yeah, actually, I didn't do it. I just made the charts on the computer, but I actually printed them out and had them hanging on the wall. Okay. Something that, of course, has been controversial. We may think that corporal punishment is controversial now. Actually, that's been controversial for decades already. But corporal punishment, I'll say right up front, that is not for really, really small children. It should be at least 15, 18 months before one starts something like that. And at that age, one probably wouldn't, take them on the lap and give them a hard spanking. But one should start relatively young. And also, by age 10, I would say at tops 12, one should be quitting with that. If one hasn't achieved one's goals, one won't achieve them with spanking anymore after age 10 or so. And one should never shake an infant. That is very damaging to the brain, to the neck, and those kinds of things. Or slapping on the head. Years ago, we were seeing somebody off at the airport, and in those days they still had observation decks to watch the planes take off. And we were up there watching somebody leave. And there were several other families around. There were two families, they were busy visiting, and their children were just going wild. They're running back and forth and screaming and laughing and all kinds of stuff. And every once in a while, a parent would turn around and tell them, be quiet and don't run so much and stuff like that. And then turn back and keep right on talking. And then a point came after probably about 15 minutes of that, where the child came running by again, was noisy, and grabbed him, and bam, 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 on the head like that. That isn't punishment. That is venting one's frustrations. That's what happened there. So those kinds of things are not punishment. We want to benefit the child, so it has to happen in a way that will, that the child can learn something from it. So, slapping the fingers or something like that is a different thing. Let's say a young child, maybe 3, 4 years old, has a nail or something in his hand and is going to put it into the electrical plug. To slap his hands, then just to teach him, hey, that's a no-no, and this is a serious no-no. That would be one thing. But actually, there are things that are quite effective. There's a muscle here. We all have them. And pinching that muscle can help get a child's attention, or even an adult's, as far as that goes. There are a few other places. Another place is here, or just above the knee. Just a little squeeze can get their attention. And if it's actually a spanking, it should be on the place that God made for spankings. It's called gluteus maximus. You sit on the thing all the time, not other places. Now, how intense should a spanking be? It has to be hard enough to hurt a little bit. If it doesn't sting, it won't do anything. But not so hard that it turns into a beating or bruising or those kinds of things. If we spank too hard, what we will do is we will ignite resentment. Our child will start to resent us. So when a child does something that deserves a spanking and we're angry, then we need to get rid of our anger first. We need to deal with that. And then once we have calmed enough that we can be reasonable, then we step in and deal with the thing that the child did, which needs a response. The whole question of hand or instrument. Dobson doesn't give a clear answer which he prefers. I do lean to one side, and namely, I prefer an instrument. He gives the arguments for and against for both sides, but the hand should be associated with love, with support. That is my view. So, because if I use the hand to also spank with, and then the child is not necessarily always sure, what's that hand going to do now? Is it going to help me or is it going to strike me? And so for that reason, I lean to that side, to not using the hand for spanking, but rather to have an instrument to do that. And when I talk about instrument, I'm not talking about an electrical cord or a rubber hose or those kinds of things. We had a paddle. It wasn't a big wide paddle, but make sure that it doesn't have sharp edges. Work off the edges so that they're round. And I like to use just a light piece of spruce wood, because spruce wood is very light. And so you don't, there isn't as much force, inertia in it. You know, I have a mechanic friend who told me one time, John, if you're trying to knock something out of a hole and it won't come, don't hit harder, take a bigger hammer. But that is mechanics. We are dealing with children here. So I prefer something light with rounded corners so it doesn't bruise so easily, and not use the hand. Okay, next page. Where should it take place? We should do it in private. Not when our other children are around or those kinds of things. And never in the presence of strangers. And if necessary, just say to the child, look, we're going to deal with this later. You know, if it isn't convenient just then, we're going to deal with it later. Who should not spank a child? And I had never even really thought much about this, but Dobson alerted me to that. Somebody with a history of child abuse. Somebody has had that kind of problems. Secondly, somebody who secretly enjoys punishing corporally. I remember our oldest child, the first time that I spanked her. Boy, did she shape up. And you know what I realized on myself? It made me feel very powerful. And that can be dangerous. We need to have self-control. So somebody who enjoys punishing should not be spanking children. Or if somebody feels himself out of control while spanking, then again, I remember a friend of mine getting a spanking in school, and that teacher could not control himself. Now, he didn't do it in front of the class, but we knew the results. And as a matter of fact, that student's father later went to school and said to the teacher, that will never, ever happen again, will it? That teacher, he lost control if he spanked. And grandparents. It's not the grandparents' job to spank children. As grandparents, we need to leave that to the parents. That is their job. Now, Dobson suggests one exception. That is if parents, let's say, are going away for a week or something like that, the grandchildren are staying with you, and there may be some provisions made for something like that. But as a rule, grandparents are not there to spank their grandchildren. It's the parents that need to raise them. This is a big topic. Any questions, any comments? I should mention one thing. I realized that I missed that in putting it in here. Spanking is essentially for defiant behavior, not for just any old behavior, but where a child refuses to do what you're asking it to do. That it's a procedure of last resort, not something that you do for all kinds of stuff. I said before, be creative. Try to think of other ways of correcting, of punishing. I can't remember whether I ever had to do this with the girls, but our son, I know, he had to write an essay for me one time. As you know, he had done something, and so I gave him an assignment to research that subject and write an essay for me. Here are a couple of guys whom I've made write essays. So, yeah, be creative. Okay, never punish a child for something he did not know was wrong. If a child does something that is wrong, and it's the first time, you sit down with him, explain to him that it's wrong and why it's wrong. Then, should the behavior be repeated, that's when punishment will kick in. And if it's going to be corporal punishment, this is a very important procedure. If the child knew that it was wrong and he did it anyhow, then punishment is deserved. And he will know it. He will understand the correction that you're giving him. And one has to then sit down with that child, remind him what he just did, and that he deserves punishment for him. And then here, I think this is a very important step. Tell him exactly how you're going to punish him. And if it's going to be corporal punishment, will he get 3 swats? Will he get 5 swats? But so that he knows what he's to expect. That you're not going to go on endlessly or something like that. And after that, take him in your arms and love him. Tell him that you love him. Tell him that just because you had to spank him does not mean that you don't love him. You love him. Nothing that he ever does will stop your love for him. I was painting a bedroom one day, and our oldest daughter did something, I cannot remember what it was, but it was something for which she knew better, and she had done it anyhow, and she deserved a spanking for it. And I told her that. Of course, wasn't the cleanest. I was painting. I was in the middle of painting, and but we dealt with that. And then once it had been administered and everything, then I turned back to my painting, and then she says, "Daddy, you need to love me." So I had to put my roller back down, and take her in my arms and assure her that I still loved her and those things. So you can tell that if you have a step-by-step procedure like that, these things make a difference. And they understand. So there can be disobedience to various degrees. Sometimes we ask our child to do something, and they fail to do it, and we have to decide, okay, was this just because he was off in his own world? He wasn't really trying to be defiant or yen on, we would say in Low German. He was just not paying proper attention. Or maybe he was busy and had plans and wanted to see whether he could get away with it. That's 1 degree more serious already. Or maybe he was frustrated about some other circumstances. Maybe one of his siblings had just done something and he was frustrated there. Or maybe his parent had been attending to the baby and he hadn't been getting any attention and was frustrated over that. Or was he actually defiant? No, I'm not going to do that. You can't tell me to do that. What's his body language showing? What's his mouth saying? And so on. So we want to try to be as observant as we can, whether we can discern where exactly is he at when he hasn't done what we asked him to do. And our response should reflect that. At least briefly think, okay, why did he not do what I asked him to? And then we need to decide what would be the right response to that. If he has simply been distracted, then bring him back on track. Or if it's been more serious, then it might have to be together with a talking to and letting him know that we really expect him to do that. Or if it's more serious than that, say, look, unless you do this, you will be spending time in your room, or you will have to go and sweep the front steps of the house, or whatever we choose to be. And of course, if it is defiance, then we need to be even stronger in our reaction. Now, reflection should not slip into inaction. Yes, we need to try to judge the situation as closely as we can, but a danger there is that, well, I'm not sure and I don't want to do the wrong thing, so I don't do anything. And we won't train any child by doing that. Okay, we talked about the muscles and where to squeeze and that kind of stuff. And also spanking should be a last resort, not the first one. The goal of punishment is correction. Training is progress toward an improved behavior or improved attitude. The benefit is for the child, not for me to vent. The punishment always has to be with the child's well-being in mind. Don't punish innocent curiosity. If something gets, he sees something and wants to look at it and accidentally breaks it, that wasn't malicious. And so we have to take that into consideration. Oh yeah, here, child refusing to eat. Sometimes it's a matter of texture or taste, and maybe some mothers are pretty good at mixing it with something else so that they eat it then anyhow. With our second daughter, ketchup worked. Was it the second one? Or was it the fourth one? Yeah. Ketchup worked. I think there were a year or two where she ate almost everything with ketchup. But except breakfast. So. And one has to be a little bit sensible here too. Let's say there's something that the child doesn't want to eat, but those same nutritions are in a different food that the child is willing to eat. Substitute. What's the big deal? And at a certain age, one can maybe require, well, you have to eat one spoonful, and to slowly get them that far. Our son did not like tomatoes, and I don't blame him because as a kid, I didn't like tomatoes either. I eat them now, but not then. One time he was in his probably early teens. He had been visiting a friend and received lunch there. And when he comes home, then Gabi asks him what they'd had for lunch. Oh, a tomato sandwich. Oh, did you eat that? Yeah. So, he already realized that when I'm in a social setting, that even if that isn't my favorite food, I can eat one tomato sandwich. And so one can introduce things, not make them eat lots, but help them to train themselves, to discipline themselves. Now, if a child refuses to eat, a child may not be feeling well. And if it is sick, it's quite understandable. If I'm not feeling well, if my stomach is upset, I can go without food for a day easily, no problem. And you encourage a child to drink, but especially if it has a fever, but it doesn't have to eat. The child may be distracted. Maybe there are other things going on. Or maybe you have plans to be going to the zoo in the afternoon. And here he's supposed to eat lunch, but his head is elsewhere. He's excited about going. Maybe his siblings are doing something that he finds funny. Or maybe the TV is on. That's probably not the best idea at mealtime. Have mealtime around the table and with the family. Doesn't distract. Or the child may want to start feeding itself. I don't remember exactly how old she was, but our second daughter, one day, Gabi wanted to feed her and just would have none of it. And finally, Gabi just had to leave it alone. And didn't eat the next meal either. And the third meal, by that time we gave her a spoon, and she was eating, and Gabi was feeding her, and it was going in. But the issue was, she had made up her mind, she wanted to feed herself. She had an older sister who could eat by herself, and she wasn't to the stage yet where she could tell us what she wanted. But she knew jolly well what she wanted. And so maybe the child is refusing to eat because it wants to start trying to eat by itself. It'll be messy, but they'll have to learn to eat on their own sooner or later. And so there are funny reasons sometimes. And here's something that I stand by, and Dobson says that too in his book. No young child, not even one that can't speak yet, that is not sick will not starve itself to death. That won't happen. If there is food around, eventually that child is going to open its mouth and eat. So when it becomes a clash of the will, the child's and yours, let him go hungry. Now later on, when the child is older, and let's say we're having eating issues, I know what we have sometimes done, and also other parents, is if they don't finish their plate, okay, there's another meal coming. You can finish it then. Nowadays, especially with microwave ovens and stuff like that, one can reheat things quite easily. And now, keep in mind, this is what we're after, to train them, to teach them. That we don't just put stuff on our plates and in the end throw it out, but we learn to put proper portions in and to eat what we've taken. Okay, I think we're going to quit. We are not quite through chapter 6. Maybe we'll just try to finish that off tomorrow and jump into chapter 7 tomorrow. Any questions, any thoughts?
Doesn't stand in the Bible that we're to spank or any type of punishment? Like, is it in the Bible? Is it biblical that we have to spank?
That we have to?
Yeah.
No, not that we have to. Our job is to train. And if you can successfully train a child without spanking, hey, good for you.
Is it biblical? Is it in the Bible?
That one can spank?
No. Is it mentioned like, yeah. That we like by the rod, spare the rod, spoil the child, like so to speak. Is that like is the rod is that spanking? Does it refer to spanking specifically? Like
I would say so. If a Bible verse makes sense literally, there is no point in trying to make it figurative.
it's in Proverbs, right?
Yeah?
So it's a general principle then, right? Like, in general, spare the rod, spoil the child.
Yeah.
It's a, but is it in every case?
No.
I think that would be the way the Proverbs say it.
I do believe that throws out the thing going around these days is gentle parenting, where you don't ever do anything against your child's will. I believe the Bible speaks against something like that. It's spare the rod, spoil the child. There is implied that you can't always be like that yesterday, you can't always be your child's friend. Sometimes you have to be.
Right. And let's not forget that foolishness is in the heart of the child. So a child's heart does have this drive to being independent, to doing what it wants. Our heart had that, and our children's hearts have that. And so we need to help our children learn self-control, self-discipline. And if we can do it without spanking, great, but we can't always. We have 4 children, and there is one of our children whom I can't remember whether I've ever spanked her. She was so sensitive. You only had to look at her, and she already was sorry for what she'd done. And but we had another child whom we did have to spank. And so our goal is to train. And our goal is not to decide, can I do it without punishing, without discipline, or do I have to discipline, or do I often punish? Do I often spank, I should say. So punishment and spanking are not the same word. Discipline and spanking are not the same word. Discipline is to teach, to train, whereas spanking is spanking. One always tries with a gentler way of doing it, but there will be times where, with most children, where it will be necessary. And you will make mistakes. I have made mistakes, misjudged, stuff like that. It's not an easy thing when we have children and make ourselves responsible for training them. We've taken something on ourselves that will take work and sometimes ends in tears, even for the parents. Okay, let's see each other tomorrow.